Okay, so in this video, I'm going to show you how to build a hiring funnel from scratch for whatever role that you are hiring for. The way that it works is that once a form like this is filled out, an automation like this will run. And what this automation will do is it will take the person that has just applied, get their resume, download it, turn it into text, and then run it through an AI agent that is going to score the application based on some set criteria that we have set out or that you would have set out for the role. In doing so, this will then send a Slack channel message into a little update channel that we have, a bit similar to this, and it will provide the email, the age, the score, the summary, and a breakdown of the score. So you can go in one by one and determine exactly why the person that just applied is or is not a good fit for the role. And once that person has been shown, the next thing that will happen is you'll obviously have conversations with them. As you're having conversations with them, they will most likely end up being qualified for an interview if they get to that stage. Once they get qualified for an interview, they'll go through a form that looks like this. Once they fill in the Calendly form, what will happen is this automation will run, send an update to the same channel, saying that a new interview has been booked or rescheduled or cancelled, depending on what the event is, because this is a webhook that watches all of those events. And then from there, you can carry out the interview process. What we are going to cover here is going to be every single level of the 4 levels of a system that I always talk about, which is the backend data, the interface, the agents and automations, and then the dashboards. And I'll speak on the dashboards while showing you how this was built right here. This is more than just one automation, one agent, because a lot of the most important types of systems are made up of multiple automations and are made up of multiple bases or tables inside of a base. So we are going to tackle this by looking at what goes into making an entire system automated. This is basically everything that I do. So you can see that from my website if you go here, and from my YouTube where I have other videos. And sometimes I do some off the cuff videos on my Twitter, a bit like this one. And what's great about this video is that I'm talking about proprietary business data. And that is why, and this is one of the things that I talk about a lot. And I'm going to use this video to basically explain exactly what I mean by that, because this will be a direct display of the architecture that we build into all of our systems. So this one in particular is an Airtable base with an Airtable interface sat on top of it. And then agents, including application form flows, some job application management, which you've seen, the app scoring, the call book flows, which you saw, and then call complete flows, which you didn't actually see. That's happening underneath behind the scenes. And then the dashboard, which creates the 30,000 foot view, which allows you to understand exactly what's going on with your applicants, who your high scoring applicants are, and where in the process they are as well, including any notes and ratings that you would have given them yourself. So we'll cover the Airtable structure and the build, the applications themselves, how to manage resumes and how to read them using the OCR API that we used in order to download the resume and actually scan all of the data and all of the text and turn that into something that can be read by an AI. How to build the interview booking flows, which I made, and also how to see what's happening across the entirety of your system through the Airtable setup that would have been built. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is actually walk you through the Airtable base, simply because what goes into the base is particular to different job titles and job roles, but is also going to be very, very long for me to do on this call, simply because we'll be here for an extra 45 minutes talking about and building every single one of these columns. Because all I'm going to do is go in here, type in this name, go across, click the plus, and then add in the things that need to be added in. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to summarize the different fields that you need, why they play a role, and then talk about the interface that gets made, which is this here, and all of the candidate boards and how to duplicate them for the different job roles that you have. And then I'm also going to add on the end of the forms and the way that the form needs to be created, including this URL here, which is the most important part of this entire build. So to get started, I'm just going to open it up from here. So there are 4 different tables: candidates, interviews, contracts, and agent templates. Now, contracts and agent templates I'm actually going to cover at the end of the video after I've built out everything on candidates and interviews, because the contracts include a part of the flow that actually isn't possible on N8N through the tech stack that we use, which is, as you can see, Airtable, N8N, Slack, Calendly, PandaDoc. PandaDoc itself, you need an enterprise plan in order to send job contracts or offer contracts to applicants for the jobs that you're putting out there. And I'm not buying an enterprise account on PandaDoc to explain how this is done. So I would normally do that in make.com, and I'll cover that at the end. And for the agent templates, I'll also cover where that comes into play as well. So candidates, here are all the fields that you need. You need an email, of course. You're going to need a status. You're going to need a job role, profile photo, resume, notes. Ignore these 2 AI fields. We don't actually use these. You can use them if you want, but I've not actually put them into play. They're actually quite useful in the sense that they work the same way that GPT on a Google Sheets column would work. You have a prompt that you put into the actual column, and you can choose to generate whatever it is from the prompts that you have. So here, if I go into, where is it? Recommended actions. If I go in and I show exactly what it looks like, it's just a prompt with a model of your choosing, which spits out, text in the form of AI, and you can do searches. So this is what we had in here initially, but this was generated by Airtable AI, so we don't actually use this one ourselves, but we can actually hijack it for our own needs and put our own prompt in it, depending on what we want to do with it. And I'll show you where that will go inside of the interface when it gets made. Then we have Test Gorilla, problem solving, time management, communication. So these are all stuff that comes from testgorilla.com. So I'll show you that real quickly. Basically, it's a place to do skill-based hiring. It's basically just a place to do like assessments for different job posts, and you can put different questions in there, and you basically have just what the overall is: time management, problem solving, communication. So these are just based on the type of tests that you have, and building these tests are pretty easy. But on the free version, you get like 4 or 5 tests, which are the ones that I use. If you pay for the full version of Test Gorilla, you get access to the API, and you get access to a ton of other tests, which are also useful, including attention to detail tests. Now, I don't particularly use them simply because with Test Gorilla, it's an annual commitment, and I'll hire as and when I need it, as opposed to hiring all the time. So it's more so for enterprises, but you can get some good use out of it with the free version. I would always just take the results and just manually add them to the interface when I show them. And then you have maximum number of hours, minimum number of hours, experience proficiency, which you can kind of use as explain your experience, full stop, when being used for other job titles. Then you have a bunch of other things that you can add, and then the things that are going to go into the agent are what's the password, the score, the reasoning for the score, and everything else is just stuff that you would use to basically go back and forth between either the different forms for the automations that are going to be powering them. For example, candidates and interviews has its own link, or just things that you're going to do as you're actually going through the process of adding somebody to this, the system and working with them while you're on the call. So for example, applicant notes and interview notes, I'll fill those out inside of a text document, and then I'll add it in there the same way that a salesperson on a discovery call will fill out information about a business and then add it to the HubSpot notes or the custom activities inside the close or the notes inside of the CRM. Same situation. So that's candidates. Then we have interviews, and in interviews, very, very simple. The only thing that we have is a linked record to candidates and lookup fields for the status of the person in the pipeline and the job role that they're being hired for, the start time of the interview, the end time of the interview. If the interview is passed, the call status, i.e. is it active or is it cancelled, and a lookup field for the email as well, which would go over here too. Now, I wanted to show the single selects. So the importance of the single selects is based on the process that you follow when you do your interviews for the different people. So this is the process that I follow. I will always go DQ, invited, applied. If they've taken the Test Gorilla tests, it will go here. Invited for interview, interview taken, DQ at the interview stage, trial task, offer sent, negotiating, hired in probation, failed probation, done. And by the time they're done, they are a active member of your team working on client work. So those are the statuses that I put in there, and I put them in there in this format as well. I'm going to share this base with you anyway, so you'll be able to copy and paste these for yourselves. And then for the job roles, you just add a new field here for whoever it is that you're hiring. So if I'm hiring an admin assistant, I'll put them here: developers, business analysts, operations managers, C-suite members, designers, developers, videographers, whoever it may be. You would just add them there, and that will be everything for the job role. So that's what goes into those single statuses. For call status is very simple. Again, it's just active and cancelled. That's all powered by automation. This entire field is powered by the automations as well, and the rest of them are just lookups from there as well. Now, on the interfaces, here we have a number of interfaces. One of them is called a record review, and this is just called all candidates. And the way that this one works, and what I'm going to do is actually add a new candidate myself, and I'm just going to say, this is me at icarusgrowth.com, and let's say that I've just applied, and I'm applying for the admin assistant role. So we can go into the interfaces, and we can see that the candidate here is this one here. Now, this is the information that pops up when you look at the all candidates view, which is just, this is the person, this is everything about them, and this is just a dump of all of the fields that we have. Then we have the Kanban, and this Kanban here is used to move people around, and this is basically your CRM for everything that you're going to be doing. And if you click in here, you can see that there are notes, general details, the score and the reasoning for it, which is where all the AI stuff comes into play, the task gorilla scores, which you fill in manually, and then the familiarity. So this one here is because I wanted to see if people knew about chatbots and Upwork and video editing and things for this role. And then the questions that they put inside of their form. Very, very simple. It's just a way for you to be able to use each individual part of the build out. And this is just the setup and the system upon which you're right. This is the UI. This is the UX and UI element of the database that was built. And this is where you're actually going to spend all of your time. Well, this is where the person that is going to be doing HR for you is going to be spending all of their time. And it needs to be fit for purpose, and it needs to be fit for purpose and the way that you do that is by partitioning things in the way that you would actually use them. You're only ever really going to open this up when you're on an interview and you're rating people and checking the interview notes and things like that. We always want the notes near the top, general details near the bottom. So that's where all of this comes into play. And you can see how the Kanban looks like a CRM pipeline just by the fact that you can move things around. And then this dashboard we'll get into near the end, but the whole point of this is just we have a broad overview of, how many people have actually applied for jobs, how many active applicants we have, and how many applicants are in the interview stage. This here is once people have appeared who are scoring high on Test Gorilla and are also scoring high according to the AI agent, they'll pop up under here and you can give them special attention. It's just a way for you to essentially isolate who's worth spending time looking at. And that's the reason why we've created this dashboard itself. But the particular use case for a dashboard is to understand exactly why you are basically to answer certain questions that you would not have answered already. So I want to know this, I want to know that, I need visibility on this, I need visibility on that. Dashboards are used as a physical and numerical representation of the things that you are trying to get out of them. That is the build out. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to create the form, or I'm going to walk you through the form. Now, the easiest way to do this is for me to just go back and show you what the data is again. So I'll go through the form that I created and then I will basically tell you what the names are and everything like that. So the name field inside of data, if we look at it, and this is the way that I do this all the time. So I'll always have the actual name of the column, and then the name of the column will be represented in a different way inside of the form so that it can be, usable as a form for someone else externally to fill out. So name is called what's your full name. Email is what's your email. What's the minimum number of hours per week you can work with us? I would normally just make that minimum hours or maximum hours for this one as well. And I've always added, a couple things here. So for this role, I needed more than 20 hours. If this was, then this is maximum amount of hours. This is more so just me showing who I am and what I am like through the process of doing this. And this is stuff that I'm going to sprinkle in during the whole of this video, because it's very, very important and it's beyond the nuts and bolts of what's actually being built. So maximum number of hours looks like this. Experience with social media management and admin work. So I just kind of like took the question and put it there as well. Resume is an attachment field which they can go in here and they can click and drop in a file of their own choosing. And then I've partitioned it into 2 separate stages. And this one here is job specific questions. So this one here, which is called my Upwork process comprehension question, I've basically just given them a question and I've told them, what would you do in this situation? And I've done it twice. And then I've also asked them about their familiarity with different things. And then I've asked them for a password. And the reason why I've asked them for a password is because on the initial job post, this went out on online jobs. On the initial job post, I've given them the entire job application, which was written mostly by me just conversing with Claude. But what I wanted to add, and which I did add manually, is a sentence near the bottom that said the password is oranges. So me putting what's the password here means that I can now use regex through N8N to filter out everybody that doesn't have attention to detail, because the people who don't have attention to detail would not have put oranges here. You'd be surprised, even when you make it easy for them, how few people, or how many people, sorry, will get this wrong and will mess this up. Because if you can get rid of people who do not show attention to detail or do not read the entirety of a job post before they apply for a job role, then you know that you're avoiding people who cut corners. And that is everything when it comes to hiring somebody that is going to be useful in every way, shape or form, because you are most likely going to be the most pernickety or high attention to detail person on the team. People need to match that standard. So what's the password lives there for a reason. And the reason why I've got status and job role here is because I have them set as default values. I wasn't sure if I removed them, they would stay as the default value. But I basically just put them here so that whenever the application gets sent, they will be placed under this job role and they will be placed under this status. And in doing so, it means that the Kanban, which will look like this, when it's filled, everybody's here as opposed to in the uncategorized column. And I'll normally just hide the uncategorized and the DQ column so that I can just focus on the people that are actually worth spending time looking at. And I'll do that for, interview, DQ, and failed probation as well. So that's kind of the whole process there. Now, the final part is the submission options area. Now, what I've done here is I have made it so that we can send the information directly to N8N with data about the form fill without us having to use any automations. And the reason why I did that is because using the automations sometimes doesn't work as well as doing it this way, because all I need to do in this situation is put a webhook URL in here. And then once I put the webhook URL in here, I add extra strings to the HTML here. So basically, I can call the automation by visiting, quote unquote, a website that is just a webhook URL and adding different queries to the end of the URL. And the queries will always start with a question mark, and then it would be the field equals, and then the field type, and then field equals field type. So here, what I'm sending is the record ID, which you can see here in Airtable's own language. They say you can include record ID as a placeholder for the ID for the created record. I've used this for a dynamic record ID that I will send to N8N every single time this gets filled out. And role, which I've hard coded, is admin assistant. This is very, very important because every single form is going to have this same URL with the same part of the record ID, but the role will always be different. So if I'm hiring for a developer and I have a different set of questions for the developer, I will take this role and I will change it to developer. Or if I'm hiring for an ops manager, I will put ops_manager. And what that will allow me to do is it will allow me to create different routes inside of my automation for different job roles. And what it will actually do in our situation, and this is something I'm going to tackle right at the end of the video, is it will make this entire process dynamic, because I can make any single form that I would want. And in making this form, I can just change the URL and everything that I need to do will be done for me without me actually having to add anything new other than something inside of the agent templates table, which I'll cover near the end as well. All right, so let's get to building. Let's open up N8N and go through everything that we need to go through. All right, so first thing we're going to do, create a workflow. And this is going to be called hiring management or hiring agent application management. Cool. And this is going to start off with a webhook. Insert a webhook, and we have it right there. Now, we're going to use the test URL for now. We can go in and we can turn it into a production URL pretty easily. And we can just leave it as a GET request, and we can now call this the hiring-agent, and we can leave everything there, copy the URL, and then we're going to go straight back into our form, admin assistant, and we're going to take this URL and we're going to take everything before this part here and paste it. So now the URL reads like this. icarusgrowth.app.n8n.cloud/webhook test/hiring agent record ID equals this and role equals this. So for an admin assistant with that was this application, we're going to send this information to this webhook. That is all that means. So if I listen for a test event, what I'll do now is basically go in and fill in this form so that we have something that we can use in the rest of our automations moving forwards. All right, so here is the form fill. I'm going to click submit, and then what it will do is it will say form submitted successfully, redirecting to this URL, and then it will just go and say workflow started. Now, what this will do is it will pop up with some information once it receives it. And this will give us this, which is the information that we've just sent. So you can see here that you have the webhook URL down here, which is what came from the form. And we have two things here inside of the query. We have a record ID and we have a role. This is important because this is now the dynamic value that we're going to use to get the record and then do what we need to do with the form fill. And then this is what we need to do in order to determine where we're going with the scoring and the agent and a bunch of other stuff with regards to the role. So now that we have these things, we're going to pin them. And then after pinning them, we're now going to go into Airtable and we're going to get the record that we've just retrieved from the query. So it's in my workspace, the resources of record operation as a get, and we're going to go into example hiring/HR. And from the list, we're going to get the candidate, and then the candidate record ID is going to be the record ID from the query. So if I just type in ID, we have a record ID right here. And then executing the step will give us the form field that we've just had. So this is the status, this is the email, this is all the information from the person, and including, we even have, if we look carefully, we don't actually have the resume, and that's because we didn't click download attachments, and we want to download the resume here. So if we execute the step again, we'll actually get the CV, which is a test CV that we have put in. Now, there are going to be a couple of different situations, and the situations that are going to occur are going to be when people upload a form without a CV, and when people upload a form with a CV. Because if you look back into the form, you'll see that the resume field is not a mandatory field, which means we need a switch here. So if we type in switch, we can route items. Now, what we're going to do to route the items is the following. So if you see inside of the fields, you can type in URL and you'll see that there is a resume URL, and this URL is an Airtable URL. So the way that a lot of these things work, especially when it comes to, and I think this is probably the way that Airtable's doing it, Google Drive is cloud storage for people that aren't doing anything enterprise. Then there is S3 buckets on Amazon, which is basically Google Drive, but for enterprise, where there is a ton of data that needs to be hosted, which is being imported in from external places into an application which is meant to be presenting and providing a resource for you to actually see those attachments themselves. This link is the equivalent of an S3 link or a link to a document inside of an S3 bucket, but it's just Airtable's branded version. This will not appear if the resume is not in there. So what we need to do is make a rule that says that this URL exists. And if this URL doesn't actually exist, then it means that we don't have a resume. But if it does exist, then it means that we have a resume. So the routing is JSON resume 0 URL exists. We rename the output to resume, and then the else, or the does not exist, which is the exact opposite, which we can go string does not exist. This is no resume. So if I go, and then what I always do is I click on ignore case just to make sure. I won't need it because I'm not using any string, contains or whatever it may be, but I always make sure that I ignore the case. So if I click execute step, you'll see that down the resume branch, we have the document and we have the text that came from the Airtable branch, and the no resume branch has stayed empty. So now we have a resume. If we click on download, we can see what is in this resume. And this is just a very random and very average resume that was generated by me using some very basic text, generation and Claude and stuff like that. So this is just a placeholder, but it has the information that we're looking for. And I've designed it to be in a way that was like handwriting. So even though it is a font, and essentially fonts won't look fonts are quite orderly in the same way. The way that what I'm about to show you, which is Mistral OCR, works is it will take any kind of document that you have printed or whatever it may be, and then turn it into text. The same way that when you take a picture of something over on your iPhone, you can, and if it's a picture of, let's say, the side of a can of Fanta or something along those lines, the iPhone can, if you click on the picture, you can actually copy and paste some of the text that is on the picture itself. Mistral OCR is the exact same type of technology. So we're going to use that to turn the resume into plain text that can be used inside of the automation. And that takes us to Mistral. So Mistral is an API that we can use to download text from images as well as a bunch of other things. Now, the main use for it is going to be downloading text and using its OCR. And I'll show you exactly where to find what we need in order to complete this. So if we dive into the API documentation for Mistral, after getting an account and adding some credits, which you can do inside of the workspace, you get this. Now, the way that what we need are three different requests, because these three requests are going to be what we use to generate the text from the picture itself. The first step is to upload a file. Then we want to get a URL for the file. And then we want to check that URL for the results. So the three requests we're going to need are this one, upload a file, get signed URL, which is this one, and then get OCR results, which is this one. Now, this looks kind of complicated. Oh no, we have to convert curl into a request that works inside of N8N. Easy as hell. Have a look at this. So if you take this and you go into your agent again, so we go into the resume branch and then we type in HTTP request, we can just import it. Ta-da, job done. So what this does is it gives us a method, it gives us the URL, and it gives us some other things that we are also adding to. Now, the only thing that we need to add is this name here underneath the N8N binary file. So if I type in resume_0, what it will now do is it will take that file and it will basically complete the request for us. The only thing that we are missing is the API key. So the way that N8N works when it comes to managing authentication is there will always be some form of authentication. There's a ton of different types. So if we look at some of the generic credential types, there's basic auth, bearer auth, custom, digest, header, OAuth, OAuth1, OAuth2, query. Depending on what you need, you're going to need different types of auths. This is a header parameter with an authorization involved, which means it's a header auth. So what you can do is you can type in header auth under generic auth type, and then create a new credential. So I already have a credential here, but what you would do is you would take that same authorization, and then where it says bearer, where it says bearer, Mistral API key, you want to get the API key from Mistral, paste it in here. So it might be this, and then you want to copy it, and then you want to paste it into the header auth position. So if I create a new credential and I say authorization, and then I just paste it, this is including bearer, B-E-A, capital B-E-A-R-E-R space API key. That's what all of this is. Then name it to Mistral, and then you save it. You can now use this credential instead of this header parameter. So we can just delete the header parameters just like that. So we'll leave send headers alone, but we'll delete these header parameters because we have this header auth in here. Now I'm going to use my actual one, and what will happen is we will launch this off and make sure that we can get a signed URL from the execution step. And the first thing that we're going to need to do in order to do that is to get an ID. So we have now effectively sent off this document to Mistral for the purposes of putting it through the OCR. Now we need to basically do the exact same thing with the previous steps and get a signed URL. So we're going to copy this curl, and then we're going to go back in here, import it again, paste, and the ID that it's looking for is this ID that we've gotten from this input here. So if I click expression and I click ID, hold on, because let me import it again because I've actually lost the place that it was in. So this ID here, expression, right where it says ID, we're now going to delete these 3 tokens, the $ID sign, and now we have an ID that we can use in our response. Except application JSON will delete the bearer Mistral key header because we already have a header auth, which we can find if you go to generic credential type in header auth and pick the one that we just created. And now if we execute the step, it will give us a URL. Now the final step is to then take this same URL and complete the final part of this, which is to get the results of the OCR. So if I then copy this again, import curl, paste it, it will give me the response again. And we're going to delete the header parameter. We're going to get our header auth back, and this header auth is going to be for Mistral OCR. And we keep all of this here. What we then can do is execute the step, and we have one error. Let me quickly fix that. Jump the gun a little bit. We take the URL that we've taken from the previous step and stick it inside of, we don't put it there. We stick this URL inside of this document underscore URL position, and that will give us the URL which we got from the get signed URL step. And if we execute that, what it will give us is the output in JSON. Now, what we have here is in a binary file type. We don't actually want the response format in a file. We want the response format in JSON. So if we execute it again, it will give us this. And you can see here, if I open up all of the text, we have all of the text from each part of the breakdown that we've derived from this. Now, if you go all the way down, you can see that it's just split into chunks. Now that it's split into chunks, we actually need to aggregate it. And the way that we aggregate all of this is different to how it's aggregated inside of make.com, because you can actually aggregate all of this through a function, and I'm going to show you that now. So the final step is a data transformation step, and it is an edit field step. And what this field is going to be called is resume, and the value is going to be a combination of these from this part here. And I'm going to show you how I came to what I'm going to paste in here in a second. So we're in Claude right now. And what we can do inside of Claude, and you can do inside of GPT, is you can create projects. And these projects just have project knowledge. And one of the most useful things that you could ever do with any software that you are building something in is take the help guides, download them as PDFs, and then add them to a project so that you can ask Claude questions about exactly what you need. And what I've done here is I've taken N8N's functions, and I've taken functions for different reasons. So I've got functions for numbers here, functions for objects, functions for arrays, I've got JME's path, and I've also got functions for strings in here, as well as date and time functions. And the system prompt that I've given it is play the role of a top backend developer that is adept at making workflows using N8N. You know everything there is to know about backend development, self-hosting, Luxon, and JME's path. Be a helpful assistant and answer questions fully and succinctly. That's all I needed. Now with this, I was able to get to the aggregate field with a screenshot and a small prompt. The screenshot, which you won't be able to see very, very clearly, basically just has the input field and the output field that I want. And all I said is I have a varying number of fields that are pages of the same document that I grabbed using Mistral OCR. I want to aggregate all the text into one field. What's the right way to do this? And it's given me a number of things that I can try. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try a couple of different approaches that it gave us. And the first approach is using this here. So if we take this JSON pages map, and then we click on this part here to copy it, and then we paste it in here, we can actually see the output, and it includes everything. So it's professional, education, work experience, yada, 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 yada. So without me even needing to take this information, add up like 2 or 3 different aggregate fields, I've just accumulated everything that's underneath pages. And if I execute this step, I get the entire resume in one massive chain, just like that. So we now have the information from the resume. So we could even call this set resume. And then from there, we can create the agent. And the reason why we are creating the agent here, in fact, what I'm not going to do is actually create the agent here. What I'm going to do is basically take this information here and end the workflow, because I'm going to show you how to do this in a very dynamic manner. And the way to do this in a dynamic manner is to host the user prompts and the system prompts in a way that will allow us to do this every single time that we trigger this webhook. And I'll explain the information that goes into this as I'm building this out. So what we're actually going to do here in the final step is we're going to set fields again, and we're going to set 3 different fields. So the first field is called job application, if I could learn how to spell it. The second field is called user prompt, and the third field is called system prompt. Now, the user prompt is going to be basically everything that we got from this form fill. So the resume text that we have here and everything from Airtable, including all of this stuff here. The system prompts, I'll show you how we're going to do that in a second. And the job application is the initial query that came from the webhook in the first place. So if we go down here and drag query role over into job application, we'll see that this is admin assistant. User prompt is going to be us taking absolutely everything from the form and putting it in to this column here. And system prompt is going to come from another part of the automation. And to make the system prompt, we're actually going to go all the way back to the start, right before the switch. And we're going to go into our Airtable and make a couple of different changes. So you can see here that we have agent templates. Agent templates has 4 fields: name, contract template ID, ID, and system prompts. So ID, so in fact, the name is just going to be the name of the job position. So this is the admin assistant application. The ID is what we take from the form, that part of the slug, which we put into this here, the job application here, and we take it and we paste it into the exact same field, which we call ID. So this is now the ID and this is the name. I've just put this in snake case. That's all I'm doing here when it comes to creating this, because this is what will pass through the automation itself. Contract template ID, I'm actually going to leave alone for now. I'm just going to put a placeholder there. And then the system prompt is going to be the system prompt for the agent itself. And that looks like this. So I'll go through this in a lot more detail once we get to the part where we need to look at it. But for now, just know that this is the prompt in its entirety. What we're going to do is a GET request or a search request inside of Airtable, inside of the automation for Airtable. And what we're going to do is we're going to click the base, which is example hiring HR. And then from the table, we're going to click agent templates. And we want to search by square bracket, ID, close square bracket, equals. And then we're going to take the query from the role and paste it into this position here. So I'm just going to search for role, and we're going to take it from the query, and it will show us ID equals admin assistant under the expressions. And if we execute the step, it will give us nothing. All right, 1 second. I added there was an extra thing there. But yeah, it gives us the system prompt, and it also gives us the rest of the stuff that we got from the fill out that we just did right here. So now we have basically everything that we need nearly to fill out another automation, which is going to be where the agent comes into play. So what I will do is, now that we're at this stage, I'm going to execute the previous nodes and get all the information back. And once I've got this information back, I now have a system prompt. So this is the system prompt here. And then the user prompt is going to be us adding all the information from all of the Airtable steps. And then once we've done that, we're going to trigger a sub workflow. And this sub workflow is going to be the next workflow that we make. Okay, so we needed to set the user prompt and the system prompts. What we did, and I did this off camera, so I'll show you what I did off camera. But basically, the step where we were looking for the agent templates needed to be right here as opposed to back here, because when it's put back here for some reason, it will remove the OCR document, the document that goes through Mistral OCR. So we've just taken the get record, which is getting all of the answers from the form, and filled out all of the OCR steps here, gotten the resume, set the resume, and then we've now found the agent template that we want, so that we can input the job application, system prompt, and the user prompt, which looks like this. So it is just an amalgamation of all of the fields that we have dragged from this step here. So we have the name, the hours in the name, the email, the hours per week that they want to work, which is what is the minimum number of hours to what is the maximum number of hours. Answer to the Upwork question, which is the Upwork process comprehension question, which we had inside of here, which you can see is this one. And then we got the rest of it, which is the prompt engineering question, which is the same with different field, the social media management admin experience field, Upwork familiarity with chatbots, video editing, and then the resume down below as well. So you can see on this right hand side, if you scroll all the way down, you can see that the resume is also here too. And this is all of the text from the resume as well. Now, this is the user prompt. We're going to take the form fill, including the resume, and the system prompt, which is what we took from the agent templates system prompt field here. And we are going to push that into a separate workflow. But before I connect the workflow, I'm going to save it, and I'm actually going to make it. So if we click here, up here, workflow, create, this will be when executed by another workflow. And we need to define some fields. And the fields that we're going to define are the fields that we put inside of the set record step previously. So what I'm going to do is actually cross-reference that by duplicating this step and then going back in to the automation that we've just made so that we can get the exact IDs for the things that we created. So job underscore application is the first field, which is a string. The second field is user underscore prompt, and the third field is system underscore prompt. So we're going to copy and paste these directly in. And once we have done that, we can now name this the job scoring agent. And this is for application management. So this is the step in the system, which is for hiring. So this is now the second automation, which will be triggered by this first automation, which means we can now connect to these two together, and then we can pick the automation that we want. And this is called job scoring agent at management. If we execute the previous nodes, we'll get all the information that we want to drag in. And you can see that here, job application goes here, user prompts goes here, system prompts goes here. And then, do we need to convert the types? No, because we've actually set the types here. So what we can do is we can execute the workflow. In fact, let's do this one more time inside of here and check what goes on in here. So this will open up the sub execution. So it just shows us that everything succeeded. And it means that we've just sent all this information over to this automation here. Now, when pulling this information into the automation, we actually don't need to actually like trigger it from here in order to get the information in the other end. What we can do is just take the information that we have grabbed by opening up the expression and just type in Control-C and Control-V into the fields that we want. So if I execute the steps, I can then click the pencil on our when executed by another workflow trigger and paste the information inside of the code that we want. So the job application is admin assistant. The user prompt is in a string, which means that we need 2 speech marks as well. And the same with the system prompt. So we're just going to go in and copy and paste all of the text that we wanted. So the user prompt is this. I'm just going to copy all of this and paste it in here. Now, the problem with this is we actually don't have this in the type that we need it in. So what I'm actually going to do is, instead of copy and pasting it, I'm actually going to, let me just discard this and then turn it into something active and then basically run it so that we have the data squared off inside of the when executed by another workflow step. So the way to do that effectively is to go back into your executions. So, and where you had already clicked in here and you executed the step and it sent this information over, what it would have done is it would have opened up inside of the executions path a number of executions that would have succeeded. In this situation, which is the latest one that we did, this one said it succeeded and it took all the information that we have received and it has spit it out for us as so. So we can either copy the output data and paste it in, or we can click this button here called copy to editor and it will pin this information for us. And now we can use this in the next steps. And this is what we're going to do to build out the job scoring agent. And that starts off with an AI agent. So when creating the agent, the only thing you need to do is click on the source for the prompt, which is to define it below. And the source for the prompt is the user prompt. And then for the system message, we open up the add option button, get the system message, and then drag in the system prompt here. And then this will be all of the information that needs to go into the agent itself. We don't need a memory. We just need a chat model and the tools that we're going to need. And the chat model that we're going to use, and we've kind of defaulted to this across the agency in its entirety, is OpenRouter. So OpenRouter, if I type in openrouter.ai, is a unified interface for LLMs. When you sign in, you can get keys and you can import some credits. And what it will do, and if I go back into N8N and show you, is it will give you access to every single model that you could even think of. So you have all of the OpenAIs, you have O4 Mini, you have all the Perplexities, you have Quen, you have Mistral, which is what we used for the OCR, you have Llama, you have Gemini, you have Grok, you have DeepSeek, you have Anthropic, Claude, and a bunch of other things as well. So I like to use, it's because this isn't, and it very much depends on the volume of people that you're getting in, but most job applications will see in the entirety of its lifespan, for the types of businesses that I work with which are multi 6 figures and 7-figure businesses, 50 to 100 applicants per role, per job post that you put out, which you put either LinkedIn ads behind or you stick on an online jobs or a job form like that. So I just go for Claude Sonnet 4. It's the easiest thing, and I can just type in the name of the LLM that I'm using into the name of the OpenRouter, and this is Sonnet 4. The only thing that you need to do in order to actually get OpenRouter for yourself is just to create the credentials, and the credentials is just the API key that you would get from the keys portion here, which you would get over there. So what I'll do is keep it moving and keep Sonnet 4 over here, and then the tools that I'm going to need are a calculator, and I'll tell you why in a second. And this is most of the setup. The only thing we also want to do is require a specific output. And this output format will need us to create an output parser, which I make as auto fixing. And then after adding the auto fixing output parser, I connect the same model that I've been using. And then the output parser is a structured output parser, which I then go and look through the schema types to define below. And I basically take all of this and I cut it. Now I'm going to show you what I do with the thing that I've just cut, because it doesn't go away. In fact, it's used in a very, very useful manner, in the same way that we use a lot of the things that we did with N8N. So I have a Claude project called Structured Outputs for AI, and this creates JSON objects that spit out structured outputs. So the only thing that I have in here is project knowledge, and this is just a string of examples of the thing that I'm looking for it to do. So I've given it an objective, which is to capture all of the context within the message that it would be receiving and provide a JSON object following the specified structure below. And it's just the information that I put in, or that I cut from what we had before. Now, one thing that you can add as well, which I have seen in tools like clay.com that will also use structured outputs in this JSON schema, is a description key value. So the way that it works is, and you can read this like indented bullet points, but basically you have a type, which is called object. And then within this object, you have properties, and properties is almost like an indented bullet pointed list. So the properties that you have in this example, this is a state, another indent. This is a string type. And then you could also have a description underneath it, which is what you can see here, which is a description about the state. And then you go back and indent. Cities, this is an array, which means we're expecting a list here. So within that indent, it's the items. And then within items, there's another indent, and that indent in the bullet point says type. And the type of items that will be inside of this array is a string. And then underneath that is a description, which includes the description of the items that you're going to receive. And it's just the way to structure everything in a way that you would want it. So I used this to generate this. And this is what we are going to use for fields inside of our system. So the only thing I did is, here's a prompt that I'm using, and I just need 3 fields. So the way that I created this is I actually went into Google Sheets and did some finicky stuff with creating a score, which I can actually show you kind of briefly, because it will make everything that I'm about to show you make sense. So I made this very basic criteria for scoring the people, or the people that I wanted to apply to my admin assistant role. So the way that I did this is I took the form that I had, which I'll put this here, and then I'll drag this all the way over here. And if you look at the form, what's on the form are a few things. It's maximum and minimum hours of working per week, experience with social media management and admin work, and then 2 questions that basically help me ascertain, okay, this person knows exactly what they're talking about. Let's make sure that we prioritize these people for interviews. And then familiarity with the things that they're going to be using, as well as things that are also optional / bonus. So I took all of this criteria and I thought about it, and I said, what do I actually want? So minimum hours above 20, maximum hours above 50 is a plus, but it is or isn't what we need. It doesn't really matter that much. And then for social media management and admin experience, either low experience, medium, high, or extensive experience, defined as these. What's on the resume, because I'm hiring from online jobs, the people that I've worked with from the Philippines that have been the best with us have been people that have either gone to an international school or have had fluent English because of either where they've lived or how they've grown up. And a good resume also uses space efficiently and doesn't have a ton of writing, and is usually stuck to at least around a page of writing. And then for the questions, this is the correct answer, and this is the correct answer, so 10 points for those. For the prompts, these are the 2 correct answers. For the drop downs, the top ones, which is, I use it every day, I'll use it regularly, get this amount of points. This gets a few different points. And then I have some penalties here, like consistent mention of sir. That's just not part of the culture, so I don't really want that. Usage of slang, poor grammar, or not native / fluent English. Now, I'll probably remove this when doing this again, because everybody uses AI to make themselves sound better on their resumes. So you never get non-fluent or non-native English anymore. But what that does is it basically creates a score. So these are just arbitrary number values, by the way. These are just completely arbitrary number values. And this gives us a score. Now, I wanted the score to be out of 100. So the fact that I got 108 meant that I needed a factor to multiply my answer by to get a score out of 100 based on the criteria that I've put up here. So when I go in and you see this number 0.925925, when you see that number, you'll realize exactly what it means. It's just me dividing 100 by the score number that I got in the first place. Now that got us to 100 because it started at 108. And what that means for our prompt is that if we go in here and you take a look at this prompt, you'll see that we're looking inside of the scoring system to score based on the system that we have outlined inside of here. And we've just copied this entire thing and we stuck it in Claude and we said, I basically just need a JSON object that will accomplish or that will give me that information so that I can understand exactly what I'm going for. And that's how we came up with this. So this is what we copy and paste into our agent so that the agent knows exactly what it needs to do. So if I can find the agent, it should be right here. All right. So now that we have the information for the structured output, we'll paste it in here. And you can see that the basis behind it is that we want the first name, the last name, the email, the age. If the candidate is an automatic disqualifier, and we can make that, and that type is Boolean, so true or false. Then we have a score, which is the final calculated score out of 100 after applying the scoring system. And I've already highlighted in the system prompt that I'd be multiplying by 0.925. But if you're scoring differently or you make different criteria for scoring for all of your other roles because your two questions are going to be weighted differently or some of the other merge fields that you're bringing into the equation are going to be different, then you don't need this part. So I'm actually going to delete this part because for the sake of making this dynamic, so that it can work across any type of job offer that you get, it's going to be stuck with this. Then we have a reasoning for the score, which is just a detailed breakdown of how it was calculated, and then the candidate's description itself. And that is the structured output that we're going to get. And you'll see when we run this that it will give us something that we can use. So the agent is taking the user prompt, which is all of the information from the resume, and the system prompt, which is you are the head of hiring at this agency. You're currently hiring for this. Your task is to take this. And it is going in and using Sonnet and the output parser to calculate a score based on the user prompt information and based on the system prompt that it was provided. And when it finishes, it should give us a block of JSON, which we can then use to update our systems. And here is what it spits out. So first name, last name, email, age, automatic DQ, true or false, score, and then a reasoning for the score, and then a candidate description as well. So you can see here, strong candidate with excellent written English proficiency demonstrated through a well-crafted professional resume with perfect grammar and clear structure. Has relevant high school experience in both social media management and admin work across education. This is the education background, yada, yada, yada. And then scoring breakdown, which is, this is the amount of hours available. This is their experience in social media management and admin, and so on and so forth. So this is the agent build. This is literally the only agent that is operating inside of this entire hiring funnel, but we need it because we need it to think in multiple ways to get to the next step. So the step after executing the workflow required some level of thought that couldn't be determined through simple steps in a way that wasn't completely laborious. And in doing so, by giving it the calculator, we've now basically created a scoring system. And what comes out of it is stuff that we can then add to Slack, which is the next step. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into Slack and we're going to create or send a message. Now, the Slack setup is something that I've done in other videos, so I'll skip ahead over it. But the long and short of it is you're going to need to go through it the long way. So you want to go to api.slack.com/apps. It will take you here to this app screen. You want to create a new app, and then in creating a new app, it will open up this screen. Create from scratch, add the app name, and then pick the workspace that you want to add it to, and then create the app from there. Once you've created the app, and I'll click into this app, for example, which is the main app, you'll get a client ID and a client secret. You will need to go into OAuth and permissions to basically allow it to do certain things. and you want to give it a bunch of scopes. And these, if you wanted to pause the video or scan through the video and look at all of the scopes that I give my apps, these are all of the scopes that I add to the apps. And this allows us to do every single action that we would do with a business inside of Slack. And you would just click here to add more if you wanted to add more. Once you've done that, you go back to basic information and you take the client ID and the client secret, and then you go into here, create new credential, and you do it through the OAuth 2, and then in fact, that's not even how you do it. Hold on, let me go backwards. So inside of the credentials, if you click here, you'll see that through the access token, you'll get an access token from the OAuth and permissions part. And then once you've got the Slack access token, you'd paste it in there, and now your bot is something that you can use. The previous screen that I showed is how you connect yourself. So for me, if I go in and I click here, this is me signing in through OAuth 2 by clicking the button and basically having it come up saying, Slack wants to use your face on a bunch of stuff inside of your workspace. Give it access, and then it will enable access and enable me to send messages on my behalf. Neither here nor there. That's how you do Slack stuff. Now, I'm going to click the bot here, and then we're going to send messages to a channel, and this channel is going to be called the hiring channel. And then the simple message that we want to send is the name, the email, and details in the thread. So I'm going to get that message now, and then I'm going to paste it in. And this is how the message looks. So we have name, and then it's just the fields for first and last name, email, field for the email, age, field for the age, and then the score out of 100. More details in the thread. Click here to view the full form, and then we tag the channel here. So if there's ever any worry or reason as to why I've put these in, it's because Slack has its own version of Markdown, and you can find that by just typing into the Google search bar Slack Zapier formatting, and you'll see how to format a Slack message in Zapier, and you can even see it there inside of the AI prompt there. In fact, this is even the wrong page. Where is formatting? So you can even, yeah, here you have it right here. So bold is 1 asterisk on one side, italics is 1 underscore on either side, strike through is like this, code blocks are the less than sign, and then the URL, and then a bar, and then your text, and then the closed bracket sign, the greater than sign. And emojis are used through emoji codes, and the place to get all of them is called emojibase.dev. So if you go to emojibase.dev, you can go to the shortcodes table and then tick on Slack. And then if you copy all of these, you can use them inside of Slack. So it's just a way to make your messages a little bit clearer, a little bit cleaner, and just something that will be usable. And where we use that is actually down here in the options. So I'm going to open up all the options that we normally remove or manipulate. So we do not include a link to the workflow, so we untick that. The custom bot profile photo is an emoji code, and it's going to be one of these emoji codes from emojibase.dev. So for an application, I'll just put paper, and yeah, we'll call it scroll. All right, let's go scroll. So we'll put the emoji code in, which is : scroll : and then we're going to put send as user. And this is the name of the user, which is the name of the bot, and we can just call this new app for, and then we can take the job application here. So new app for : admin assistant, just like that. And if you wanted to format it, you could just put dot format, or however way you would use the variables. I use Claude to do all of that stuff. If you wanted to turn it from snake case into proper case to make this look a little bit better, then you could do it there. But that is how you would drag this in and make this dynamic. So send user, cool, we've got that there. We don't want to unfurl links, and we don't want to unfurl media. And we do want to link user and channel names because we have this channel message right here. And that is, for the most part, yep, everything else we kind of leave alone. That is how we send this message. So if I execute this step and then I open up Slack, you'll see that we now have this message here. New app for admin assistant, name, email, age, score, more details in the thread. Click here to view the full form. Now there isn't anywhere to click here, and that's because we haven't generated this message, which is the in thread message. And this in thread message is the next step. So if I open up, in fact, I don't normally just click the Slack button again. I'll always just duplicate what I have. because I've already got all of the little small buttons and the options already clicked, so I don't need to do that again. So what I'll do is take the information from the bot, from the agent, sorry, and that will be what goes into the message. So you can see here, if I open it up again, if I click reply, applicant details, summary, score breakdown, and that's it. So if I go in and I open up the message text box and I say summary, and then I do another forward that way, and then I go score breakdown, we now have all the information that we would need to drag in the information from the above places. So summary is going to be in bold, score breakdown is going to be in bold, and we're going to open up the fields from the agent and use those to add in everything here. So underneath score breakdown is where reasoning for score will be, so you can see that here, and then underneath summary is where candidate description goes. So this information is now called, well, now we have the information that we need in this for this part of the build, and we're going to send it as a user, and this is called applicant details. Now we do need to reply to a message, and the reason why we're doing that is because we want to stick it inside of the thread. We don't want to pollute the entirety of what we have. So we click reply to message, and it will give us a message timestamp to reply to. So if you go into the Slack bit and then you grab the timestamp and then you put the timestamp there and you execute the step, what will happen is we get a reply message here with the applicant details. So you can see summary is this is the information from the summary, and this is the score breakdown. So now we can see everything here for every single applicant that joins. And now it's up to you to do what you need to do to either qualify or disqualify the person. But the thing that we have to do is we need to go into Airtable, and within Airtable, we need to get the record. Now, the way that we can do this is in two ways. So we can either search the record, or we can search the record using the email, because it's going to be the exact same email that was just entered, or we can use the get request, and we would use the get request if we'd pushed through the record ID from the initial step here. So if we wanted to click edit fields and then add a record ID, we can add the record ID that way, and then we can just get the record. That's what I should have done, but we can just search the record, so it's not a big deal. So hiring/HR, we grab that there, and then we grab the candidates, and then we want to filter by a particular formula, and the formula is going to be email equals, and inside of the speech marks, the email that we received inside of the response. Now, the AI agent gave us the email, and it's right there. Now, I would highly recommend passing through the record ID just because that's way more concrete. And if there are two different emails, one inside of the resume and one inside of the application, it's just not going to give you the exact email, or it would mess that part up. Now we need to confirm that the email is the exact name of the field, and it is. Now what that should give us is, when we execute the step, it should return the person that we've just been playing around with. Yep, that's him. And this is the email, and this is everything else here. This is everything that we've just put through the agent. So now that we've found the record, we now want to upsert the record, or create/update the record. And we do so by, and what we need to do in this situation is add all of the information from that the agent spit out. So we go back into, not Slack, Airtable. And in fact, we can just do this again. We can just duplicate the Airtable step, and then we can change the operation. The operation is going to be create or update. And we're going to map the column by the ID that was found in the previous step. And we're going to take all of the answers from the AI agent step and just stick them into the record. So we have a reasoning for the score, which is going to be somewhere down here. We have a candidate description, which we actually don't have a specific place for, but we can just put applicant, we can put it in applicant notes for now. And the rest of them are the score, which we put in here, which was 72. And then we have age, which funnily enough, we don't have a field for, which is kind of stupid. So yeah, we'll need to add an age field there. And an email, first name, last name is also left alone. So now if I execute the step, I will get the score added to this person. So now if I go into my interface, I can see that this person is what comes through. And this is the applicant notes. And here is information on their score. And this is the reasoning for the score. So I can actually see all of this right from the moment that they apply. And that is us finishing the Airtable step. And once we finish the Airtable step, we now need to confirm if they are a DQ or not. So we add another switch, and if automatic DQ is true, Boolean is true, then we call it DQ. And if this instead is false, then we call it not a DQ or qualified. And if we execute the step, we'll see that this person was qualified, and that will allow us to then send an email to them via Gmail, which will be whatever email that we're looking to send. Now, the email that I would often send, which we're sending to the person that we've just taken from the switch JSON field to email, the subject is going to be "thanks for applying!" And in HTML, we can create a message, and this message would say something along the lines of, "Hey, thank you for applying. I want you to fill out this Test Gorilla test." So if you go into Test Gorilla, what you can do inside the Test Gorilla is you can basically send an invitation email. So if I click on this big invite button at the top, it says copy and add this text to your job post. It says we want to ensure that all applicants have a fair and equal chance. So we're using a Test Gorilla assessment. This minimizes unconscious bias in our hiring process. Successful candidates will be invited to a job interview ready to join our team. And then I'll always copy that, and then I'll go on to online HTML editor.dev, and then I will paste it and format it. So I'll just say, thanks for the application. We love that you took interest in our role. We want to ensure that yada, yada, yada. So, and here we can basically create hyperlinks and have them pop up inside of our Gmail. So what I'll do is use this and use everything inside of online HTML editor.dev to generate all of the hyperlinks and bold and insert other things to make the actual email work. So here I'm going to click on the link, or Control K, I think that's a shortcut, to open up the hyperlink and paste that there, insert that, and then make it bold with Control B. And I can leave this alone because we don't really need any of this. And then if I want to put ready to join our team in italics, I'll just Control I. And then now with this, we have, and I'll just put, hey, name. Thanks for the application. We love that you took interest in our role. I can now go in and I can basically turn this into HTML by clicking this button here to reveal the source HTML. And I'll copy that and put that straight back into our message. Turn on expression. In fact, let me paste it in again because it always looks nasty when I do it that way. And then I'll replace name with the first name that we got from the AI agent. So if I just type in first, we will get the first name right here. And it will say, hey, thanks for the application. We love that you took interest in our role. We want to ensure all applicants are yada, 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 blah, 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 blah. And then once I click execute step, it will use the HTML to generate an email that looks like this. So you can see that the here is hyperlinked. And if I click that, it will take me straight to the test itself. And this is exactly what everybody sees. Time to showcase your skills, duration 26 minutes max, invite yourself to the assessment, blah, 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 blah. So this is exactly what the applicants see. Now there are too many gaps here, and that's because on online HTML editor, if you have this space here, it's usually just a little bit too much space. So I would always take this here, and if I see that happening, I will copy a smaller version of it, and then I'll stick that into this writing here, and then replace name with first name, the same way that it needed to be done beforehand. And then inside of the options, I'm going to remove the N8N attribution just so that it looks a little bit more professional. And then if I wanted to change the sender name, I could do that. If I wanted to add attachments, I could do that as well. But in executing the step, this enables me to understand how it's meant to look when it's done correctly. And it looks like it's taking its time, but that is the email in and of itself, just like that. So that is the entirety of the system done on the qualified route. On the DQ route, the only thing that you would do here is you would just update the record with a status that equals DQ. So I will duplicate this Airtable step again, go into the DQ branch, click on it, and then after clicking on it, I'll just click, not delete, sorry, we'll click update, and we're already mapping the ID to the ID that we've been talking about the entire time. And in doing so, all we're doing is changing the status to DQ. And in fact, let me take the second Airtable one, because that will always pop up. Oh, or not. All right. Either way, it's the same ID. So this would be how you would DQ someone. And for the job role, to make sure that you have, to be fair, you don't even need to change the job role because that was hard coded on from the initial outset. So this is it. This is how you would make it so that every single job that you would have and every single form that you would create generates a job for a particular, basically takes the job that you have and it scores it based on the criteria that you have set out yourself. And this is all done dynamically, because the next time that you create a job, all you would do is create a form, which would be a duplicate of this current form. And it would be, you know, apply for the developer position. And the job role here, instead of being admin assistant, instead of being default to admin assistant, would be developer. And this URL, instead of being record ID and role equals admin assistant, it will be role equals developer. And in doing so, when you publish this form, once you've published the form, if you have an agent template for a developer and you add a contract template there and you add this ID, you can put whatever system prompt that you're putting in there to generate whatever score that you're looking for, if you plan on scoring people on different criteria. And you can take all of that information, because you have the user prompt, which is the entirety of their form, and the resume. You can take both of those things, get your system prompt from this sheet here, stick those into the agent, and the agent will score it accordingly, and it will send information to the places that it needed to be sent to. That in and of itself is enough of a way for you to get all of the information that you would ever need to be inside of this base into the base itself, categorized and classified in the way that the dashboards will be classified as well. So that kind of covers the first bit, which is bringing people into the actual system in and of itself. Cool. So to summarize where we're at right now, we have a candidates table, we have interviews, contracts, and we have agent templates, which are pulling in the different system prompts for the roles that we have created forms for. Inside of our interfaces, we also have a job role where we can show all of the notes on each of the applicants that we have. And we can go into here and basically determine what we need to do as the people are going through our application process. So once we have gotten to a stage where someone has applied and we've seen them take the test on Test Gorilla, we can simply go to Test Gorilla, take a look at the results, and start to enter them in manually. So if we went into the assessments, for example, and clicked on the admin assistant one, and we just went, let's just go down here somewhere. We clicked on miles here. So this one here is the overall score, and this is the score for time management, this is for problem solving, and this is for communication. We could take this and say, okay, this was 60, this was 34, this was 33, this was 92. So we now can go in and we can add the Test Gorilla scores over here. So this was 60, this was 92, and this was, let's just say 34, this was 34 and 33. Sweet. This information will then go off and update the HR dashboard, as we now have people under each of these, which we can now use to look at the average score. And over time, as you add that information, that will get added to the dashboard in and of itself. So what happens when someone's invited for an interview? Let's say you've put them here, you've taken them from, you know, their great application here or their great test Gorilla scores here. Let's say we want to invite them for an interview. We've moved them here and we've sent them an email saying, hey, we'd love to talk. Click on this link to talk with the team. At this point, we now need to record when people have actually, you know, gone in and applied and actually gone in and said, hey, I want to talk to you guys. let's just fill in the Calendly so that we can book a time to talk to each other. Once they've booked the time to talk to each other, more things need to happen, and that is where the next flow comes into play. So what we are going to do, and the goal of this flow, is we're going to find all of the Calendly events that pertain to interviews, check the candidates table for the people that book an interview, and then do certain things to make sure that we have pushed them in the right places. So this is all going to start off with Calendly, and that's because Calendly is the trigger, which is basically just where all of our interviews will occur. So inside of my Calendly account, for example, I have all of these call types. The call type that I'm looking for is the interview call. So if I click here under copy link and I paste it in here, you'll see that calendly.com/Icarus Growth Systems /interview. We now have times that can pop up where we can book on Friday or on Monday for whatever time that we would want. So if we book in this time, we now need to pick up whenever somebody schedules an event. And this is where the Calendly developer tools come into play. So if I type in Calendly here, you'll see that there are only triggers, and the triggers are on event created and on event cancelled. And these are webhook URLs. Now, to create a credential inside of Calendly, or to create a Calendly OAuth 2 credential, we need to go ahead and basically make a developer's account with Calendly. So if we went to developer.calendly.com, in the same browser that we are logged into on Calendly, and we created an account. So if I logged out right now, for example, it would tell me login/sign up. This is different to Calendly in and of itself. I created an account with my exact same Calendly email and password. I would recommend that if you're doing this for yourself or you're doing this for somebody else, that you use their email and a password that you can use and you can utilize so that you can get in once you're also signed into Calendly's main side as well. So if I just filled in this record and I signed in, you'd see that it would log us in and it would tell us to go in and add an app. Now this app here I've already created, but I'll create a new one and I'll call this one N8N Test. And for this, it's very, very simple, and they've basically given you everything you need. You just need to go in, put N8N Test, and then the kind of app is a web app, and the environment type is a sandbox. We don't need a production one. I don't think we'll ever need a production one if we're using this internally. And the redirect URI is provided to you by the credential settings here. So the OAuth redirect URL is this here. So if we just type this in and then paste it and then click save and continue, then it'll give us a client ID, a client secret, and a webhook signing key. We basically left this alone. We haven't needed this, but the client ID and the client secret are what we're going to put into these two fields here. So if I take this client ID, I paste it here, and I take this client secret, I copy that, paste it here. OAuth 2 recommended, connect my account, credential created. And now it's asking me, continuing will enable the N8N Test application to connect your account and manage your Calendly events. Connect to Calendly, connection successful, green bar, everything's good. So I'm just going to put this one, I'm just going to call this one Sheni Test, and then click save. Now what that has done is it has allowed us to, from our scopes, trigger a webhook for subscribed events that either belong to a user or to an organization. We have access to both with this OAuth, simply because I think it's because I am the owner, so I get organization and user preferences here. If you aren't the owner and you're filling this in, then you may only be able to get user. It just depends on basically on the access that you get, but I believe everything's good either way. We normally just do organization. And the events that we want to add are both cancelled and created. And the easiest way, or the best way to get a trigger in, is by scheduling a meeting. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. All right, so if we execute the workflow, it's now waiting for us to create an event, and we schedule said event. Then what should happen is it should give us information. And this information is created information because the event is called invitee created. So we're going to pin this for now. And we are going to do a number of things. So the first thing is we need to make sure that we filter for interviews. We can only filter for interviews because there are a ton of other different types of meeting. And the meeting that we're looking for is obviously not going to be the sales call links or the discovery call or onboarding call links. So we go for the interview links only. So we need a filter. And this filter would have to be whenever and I know that the name is interview, so I'll just search for interview, which is the scheduled event name contains interview. And I'll type interview in lowercase and then click ignore case so that comes through. And then what that will do is it will keep it. And if it discards it, then we don't have it doesn't go in any direction. So this is the filter. Now, this is for all events, but there are 3 different types of events that will occur. And I've done this in multiple make.com videos beforehand, but the way that this webhook works is that there are canceled events and created events. And both of these will trigger whenever there is a reschedule as well. So if someone creates an event, i.e. they book a call like I just did, event created will trigger. If someone cancels their event cancelled will trigger and we'll get a different payload. If someone reschedules an event, the first event is cancelled and then another event is created. So you actually get 2 webhooks firing off at the same time, and the rescheduled the part of the payload that says rescheduled equals true. So that's what we're going to use in 2 different switches. And the first switch is going to be for the event name. And I know that the event name for the other one is called cancelled without with 1 L. So I'm going to drag event for value 1 is contains created for the created branch. So I'll put new event. And then for this one, we want to have does not contain cancelled with 1 L. And we will spell it with 2 L's in the output name because we are British. Okay. And then we want to again ignore case, and then we want to execute the step, and it will go down the new event column. So now we have differentiated between new events and cancelled events. Whenever a cancelled event is a reschedule, the reschedule will equal false. Now this information isn't going to show, which means that I'm not actually going to be able to move and I'm not going to be able to do this path just yet, but we're going to keep this path down here anyways. This is going to be for reschedules, and then this is going to be for actual cancellations. So we'll leave these 2 branches here. The only thing that we did is create a 2 branch, one where the value was going to equal rescheduled equals true, and one where rescheduled equals false. So when rescheduled equals false, it goes down to cancellations, and when it's true, it goes down to reschedule. So that's how that's going to work. But the main thing here is now we need to search for the record in Airtable, get the information from said person's record, and say that that person has now just booked a call with us. So if we go in here and we type in Airtable, we can then search for a record, and it's going to be the same search steps that we always do, which is going to be email equals blank. And we're going to use the email that they used in order to get it done. So base from list example hiring/HR, and from the list we're going to pick candidates, and email in 1 curly bracket equals speech marks the invitee's email, which is found inside of the payload. And if we simply go in and we make this the way that it's meant to look, email equals this right here, when we execute the step, we will find the test person that we had in the status that they're in. And if we find them, we will update them and move them across in the Kanban. If they don't exist, we will upsert them. So the next step then is to add another Airtable step, which is called create or update a record. And this is again going to be inside of the example hiring and HR bucket, inside of candidates, which is taking forever to load. Hold on, let me pause it and do this again. And what we'll have once we match is the ID from the previous step in the ID using to match, and the status marked as invited for interview. Now, the reason why I have done it in this way, and this is not always the way that you would potentially need to do it in this way, is because in this situation, we are using the name interview to mean the name of the first interview. So anything that's called interview will go through this branch. But if you have a second stage interview or a third stage interview, which is called something else, you could call it interview 2 blank, interview 3 blank, and this automation will always run. And you can differentiate or add another switch here to say, okay, if interview name contains, or if the scheduled invite name contains number 2, then it's interview 2 and it will go to a different part of the Kanban. If it's interview 3, it will go to a different part of the Kanban. So if you're going to do things like that, that would be the reason as to why you would want to upsert the record and put it in specific places. I've put it in here because there's only going to be one position here. But what you could do is you could even leave this alone, and then you could just continue with a Slack message, which is going to be the next step, and not move them in the Kanban, assuming that they have already been moved manually by you into the interview stage, because you're sectioning these people off in this area to understand that, all right, they've done the test gorilla tests and they've done the applications. We'll move this person over here, this one over here, this one over here, this one over here. And that will basically tell you what you need to do or it will just give you the list of people that you need to reach out to get to actually schedule the interview. So it's depending on how the workflow will be taken in that regard. But if this is just the placeholder for where everybody who has booked a call is going to land, then it can be here. But either way, the most important thing is just making sure that you make some sort of differentiate between the people that you are looking at versus the people that you are actively going on interviews with. And that is all just about how you decide to do this automation. So I'm just giving you a couple of options there. So I'm going to put this here because this is what I've already made. I actually didn't have this in here with the one that I made for myself, but we move. Okay, now we need a Slack module, and the Slack module is going to be for messages. So we're going to send a message, and we're going to send the message through our Slack bot. And this is just going to be, again, a message sent to the channel, which is the hiring channel. And this is going to be called, in simple text, new call booked. So the name of the user is new interview booked. And we are going to use a custom bot profile photo of an emoji code. And this can just be the phone. Now that's kind of like how it's going to look. So new interview booked. So if we execute the previous nodes, then what it will do, oh, we even have an error here. Hold on, let's take a look at this. Request is invalid or could not be processed because of some other reason. Let me take a look at that real quickly. Oh, there are a bunch of placeholders where there are a bunch of zeros which messed up the applicant rating there. So we just got rid of that. And let me just go back in here and now drag some of this information in using the expressions tab. So I want a name again, and I want an email, and I want a time. Now, for the name, email, and time, name and email are very normal, but time I actually want to normalize. So we'll go into talking about what goes into time in a second, but let's just first drag in the name and the email. Now, if you look at time, start time, if I just type in start and I go into the Calendly step, if you see here, scheduled event start time, it's in ISO format right now, which means it needs to be formatted. And if I also take a look at the payload, you will also see a time zone. So here, we now know that this time in this time zone is the date and time that this is going off. Now, this is very, very important. And I'm highlighting this now because this is going to affect the stuff that happens in Airtable with the interviews table, which we are going to go into next. The current issue that we have is that Airtable doesn't accept ISO format when you want to update an interview or when you want to create an interview item or when you want to insert a date inside of a date field. So we need to format it. That's the first thing. The second thing is if you have a date and you have a time, but the time zone is always going to be different because you're either working in different places or it's just not, the information is just not there with you, then you actually need to standardize everything to a particular time. I will always standardize to Europe/London because that's where I will be, but that needs to be reflected inside of Airtable. So how do you make that reflected in a clean way through N8N so that it gets entered in the right way? There are two options here. Number one is to use ChatGPT. Number two is to use N8N functions. And I have used the N8N functions because they are that much more powerful than ChatGPT, and they also accept the format that the time zones come in through Calendly. So I'll show you how that looks in a second. So if we go back into our Claude projects and we type in our N8N project and we type in the date, you can just take a look at the one that I did earlier, which is about the date formatting. And this is all I put in there. It was just a screenshot of the exact Slack message that I was creating and asking for the proper syntax where I wanted it to say this at this time in Europe/London. And what it's doing is it's taking the date time and it's setting the zone and it's formatting it for us. So if I copy this right now, it's likely that it won't work immediately because I'll need to change some of the names. But basically what will happen is I can go in here and paste what was provided to me by N8N, and it will be undefined right now, but after a little bit of work, it will be something that can be utilized inside of our automation. And after a little back and forth with Claude, we end up with this as the correct time in the time zone that we are looking at. And you can see that it's setting the zone based on our own automation and based on our own value from the time zone that came from Calendly. So we have that right there. And I'm going to add it again in brackets, just like this. Now, that alone is enough for the automation. So we'll just finish off the rest of the steps, and the rest of the steps will be including a link to user and channel names, and also adding the channel notification to the message so that we can see everything. Yeah, best place to put it is down at the bottom, just right there. And also getting rid of the N8N attribution, because that is always going to look ugly. So if we execute this step, now what we're going to get is a message saying new interview booked, name, email, time, including the time zone, just like that. So with everything that we're looking at now, we now have for ourselves, we can basically see that the next thing that we would need to do is just go ahead and make that value that we created something that we set in stone. And we will use that as the start time. So we'll call it a string value, and we're literally just going to lift exactly what we put inside of Slack and use that for the next step. So if I type this, so if I copy and paste that in, I now have a start time, which says Monday, 16 June. It will save that. So now all I need to do is go back into Airtable, and then we need to create a record inside of the candidate space. So the first thing that we're going to do is, and the reason, not the candidate space, sorry, the interview space. Now, what does that look like? That is as simple as adding a row inside of this table here. And the reason why we're doing this is because we are going to use the name of the candidate themselves, their email, so on and so forth. And we're going to take their start time and we're going to calculate an end time if this call is passed and what the call status is, so that we can trigger this view, which is going to do an automation for us that's going to move things along in the pipeline as well. So the next step then is to basically add a record after linking a candidate here. So the next step is to go into another Airtable step, and we'll search for a record where the email inside of, search for a record inside of interviews where the email equals the same email that came from Calendly. So we'll go back into the list and back into the table, and the table is called interviews, and email, which I believe is called candidate email inside of this here. Yep, candidate email. That should equal, and then in speech bubbles, we will get the email from the invitee and add that there. And if we can't find one, then we will generate one. So here's the candidate email, execute the step, and we don't have any, which means that we can now create one. So the next step after that is to go into Airtable and then create or update a record. And then again, we go back into hiring, and then we go into interviews as well. And then we do the exact same step that we have done previously. And because we didn't find somebody here, what we'll do is we'll actually create a fake record here, which is the same name and the same candidate that we have taken from the previous step. And that will populate candidate email, which will allow us to then go ahead and, if we even have an email for them, which we do, that will then go ahead and populate the candidate email for us, which is then going to be used in the subsequent steps. So once we have a candidate email, then we can search for it and it will actually pop up with something right there. And then we can take that and we can use the ID that we found and add the names and so on and so forth from the Calendly trigger and from the fields, so that we have a name and an email and an attached candidate as well. So if we get the candidate record from this step here, in fact, if it's there, yeah, we'll still add the candidate record, and we'll actually take it from one of the previous steps. And then we'll take the start time as an expression, and that expression is going to be the start time from edit fields. And then the call status is always going to be active. And from there, we should have everything that we'll need in order to generate a row inside of the interviews table. Now, sometimes you'll run into an error where it will say that there's an invalid input for the candidate if you just try and drag the candidate field directly into here. And the reason why that will happen is because it's expecting an array, but instead it got a string. And you can tell that that's the case because this is a button that if you click in will open up another field. But in Airtable, all of these little raised buttons are actually arrays, they're not strings. So if you try and input a string in here, it will just fail. So we can go in to our trusty Claude and basically ask the question with the screenshot, how do I turn this value into an array so that it can be picked up by Airtable? And we got back this JMES path JSON candidate. So if I copy this and then put that straight in here, what will happen is it will give us the exact same record ID from the candidate, except instead of taking this field here, it basically takes this field here. So either of these work, but the reason why we're not just dragging it straight from the search for interview bit is because if an interview isn't found, we do want to be able to take the candidate that we found in this step here, and I just renamed all of these for ease of use when it comes to dragging fields in. But this candidate that we upserted, which will always be there, i.e. the candidate that will pop up in this table here, which we're trying to link to the record in this table here, that will always turn up. There will always be something here under this upsert candidate field. So if you try and do a search for interview and then update and then try and drag that column over, it may not drag anybody over, and you may just have a loose record for said interview, which will make it so that we can't actually move things around because there isn't a linked candidate there. So I keep saying candidate when it should really be applicant if it's hiring, but either way. So the way to basically get around that is to take the upsert candidate ID and then you want to push it through here. And this is going to be the record that you're looking for. So when you execute the step, it will pass through as a successful execution. And that right there is everything on that branch. So what's going to happen is whenever there's a Calendly trigger, we're going to filter only for interviews. And then once we determine what the event is, we can determine, in the case of a new event, we can search for the candidate record and upsert one if it doesn't exist. And then we'll send the call notification, set the start time, search for an interview in this interview table right here. And then we can add the record for the interview right there. So that will be everything on this branch. Now we need to take care of the cancelled branch, which means we need to pull through some information so that we can actually take the information that comes out of this trigger, which actually is a completely different payload to this. We need to be able to use that in this same webhook automation and manage whenever there's a reschedule and whenever there's a cancellation. So we need to basically go in and create those things now. So what we're going to do is unpin the previous data. And then right here, we're going to reschedule. So we have a former time here, and now we have a time for, a new time here, which means that it's going to pass through a reschedule request. So if we go in here and we just click execute workflow, it's now waiting for a trigger event. We update the event and it should pass through some information. Now it was a reschedule, so we actually got it working twice, which means that we have two payloads here. And the first item is the cancellation with a reschedule attached. So if I type in rescheduled is equals true. So this was rescheduled, but the event is invitee cancelled. Now we want to pin this because this is what happens whenever there is actually a reschedule. And the only difference between this payload and the cancellation payload is that rescheduled equals false. So we can actually use this payload or this, data, this event data to do the last two bits. Now, whenever there is a reschedule, it's very, very easy. We know that the rules are when the event is invitee cancelled, we get down to this switch, But when the rescheduled is true, we know that this is a reschedule. So we're going to change this Boolean value over to true. And then we're going to change this Boolean value over to false. So now we have both of the paths that we want. And oh, it looks like nothing even went through there. So, oh yeah, let me go ahead and, okay, so everything's pinned there. Let's just work through everything so that we can execute the steps. We've kept that one, and then we execute the steps again, and it looks like there's no output data. All right, hold on. Simple error here. This one does not contain, it should be contains. So that one was added incorrectly. So now if we execute the step, we get something down the cancelled route. And now we can take this information here and we can execute this step, and this will push something through the rescheduled loop. Now, all we need to do here is just send a Slack message, and the Slack message is going to be another call notification with just different text. So we're going to duplicate the previous one that we had, and this is going to be called call notice. And the only thing that we're going to do is say, so-and-so changed, this person changed the date of the meeting, new details to follow. So we'll say new details to follow at the bottom of the meeting. And then we'll say inside of the name, if we just type in name, we'll be able to find the name. And then in brackets, I like to put the email just so that there's some level of, okay, who is this person that we're talking about? We can get that answer immediately. So name, just rescheduled their call, new details to follow. And the reason why we're only doing this is because we're basically just not going to do anything. We don't need to do anything else because we're going to get the information about what the new event is. Because when we go into Slack, we can see that the name here and basically this notification comes through every single time. So the only thing that we need to do is make sure that we pull this in, because we're going to get that same message again. So this one here, we'll just leave the emoji codes, and then we can just say interview rescheduled as the name of the user. So interview rescheduled, and then from there we can close that, and then we can go down the cancellation bot. And before we go down the cancellation bot, because we already know that the difference between the Calendly triggers is a true and a false, we can basically go into the pinned data. So if we click the JSON tab and then click the pencil, all we need to do is look for rescheduled. So we'll type in rescheduled, if we know how to spell it, and rescheduled should equal true, which we can see here. If we type in false and then save that, this is now going to mimic the cancelled route. So if we execute the step one more time, we back to this schema, and then we switch it to, and then we execute the step again, it will go down the cancelled route. And if we execute it again, it will go down, it looks like it's gone down the rescheduled route again. So let me just make that edit one more time, as it looks like I think it's pulling from the wrong place. Okay, so you have to make sure that you change the first output, because if you change the second output for whatever reason, it will only pin the first output that comes through. So now that we're there, what we can do is just continue on with everything that we needed. So when someone cancels, the two things that we need to do are send a message saying that so-and-so cancelled, and then change the record here so that we know that the call status is no longer active and is instead cancelled. And that's all we need to make the edit for. So we need to search for the interview and send a message. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to send a message. So if we duplicate this, we'll be able to grab another call notification. And this one's just going to be called invitee interview cancelled. And we'll put the emoji code there can be an X. I just know that that's going to give us the big red cross there. So we can say this person just cancelled their call. I wouldn't give any instructions here, just because if an interviewee cancels their call, then, you know, they're deciding not to turn up. So they would have their reasons. It's not like a sales call where if somebody cancels, then we want to, you know, chase them up or put them into a, you know, like a no-show or a cancellation flow. So this is the call notification for cancellation. And now all we need to do is basically just search for and then upsert the interview record again. So if we could just, we highlight these, Control C, I'll get this out of the way, and then Control V again. Then we'll search for the interview and then upsert the interview record. And what this will do is it will search for the candidate email. And in this situation, I believe it's going to bring two items. So it's going to show both of these guys because it's the exact same lead with different record IDs. So we'll do that. And then we are going to upsert the interview record, and we're not going to change any of this. So we're not going to change the name. We're not going to change the candidate. We're not going to change the start time. We're only going to change the call status. And in doing so, if we execute the step, oh, it looks like we didn't actually, we can keep the start time then. If the start time, the start time actually doesn't exist. So what we can do here is we can just take the start time directly from the interview that we had. We can just put it back in there. And if we execute the step, it should give us something different. Hold on. So for the ones that we don't need, we can just go in and we can just remove them from this themselves. So if we execute the step now, then it will tell us that these 2 items are cancelled. So that is the entire workflow, and that is your hiring call booked flow right there. So we'll rename this and we'll call this hiring calls job app management. And if you ever have different types of calls, then this filter will change to a switch. So let's say you have a call type that is not just called interview call, you have like trial task or round 2 or round 3. You would change this filter to a switch module the same way that these are switches. And then you would have the name contain, you would basically have scheduled event name contains interview, contains trial, contains round 2, contains round 3, whatever it may be. And then you would literally just copy and paste this entire flow multiple times for every single one of the routes that you have. And that will be how you manage and how you handle all of the different routes that a call can go down. So that right there is everything involved in the process of developing the initial stages of the interview flow from the moment that an interview gets booked. So now the final part is managing what happens when an interview has been taken. So this last part is going to make it so that whenever a call is in the past and the status is active, it will fall in to a field or to a view inside of Airtable called in the past. And what that will do is it will help us use that as a trigger for more actions and more things that we can do. So we're basically just we're going to recreate this. We're going to recreate this view, and then we're also going to recreate this automation, which is going to power the movement inside of the board for the initial lists. So what I'm going to do now is basically just go down here to create a grid, and we'll call this one past calls. And what I'll also do is explain what this formula is. So with the start time that we're taking from the steps that we did in this part of the flow here, where we are, setting a start time and we're uploading it into the Airtable, we want to take this date and we want to basically create the length of time that the call is meant to take, and then add that to the end of the time of the start time and turn that into the end time. And what we can do, and the easiest way to do that is to add a date add formula to the start time. And the way that this works is you just type in date add start time, 30, minutes. And what this will do is it will give us an end time, which you can see is half an hour after the start time. And then this past is a formula that says if date time difference between the end time and now is more than 0, then we'll return false. If not, we'll return true. And the reason why we did false and true here is because this formatting can be turned into not just a number, but can also be turned into a checkbox. And that just makes it really easy for us to determine if something is a yes or a no, because we can just look at the ticks. So these two formulas here that were created inside of Airtable are going to be used to create this past calls view. Now, the way that we can have these views work in our favor is by making sure that the filters do what we need them to do. So things should only pass into this view when the call is for somebody that we actually want to talk about when it's right after the interview has been taken. So we basically want to remove anybody that has been DQ'd between the time that they took the call and the time that we moved them. into the DQ status, we want to take anybody that has a call that has already happened. And we also want to take anybody that has a call that has already happened, but is also active. So we need to remove cancellations. We need to remove calls that are in the past, that are not in the past, and we need to remove DQs. So the way that we do that is job pipeline status has none of any of the disqualification ones that we have. So we'll just remove DQ, DQ interview, and failed probation. And we also want the past to equal a tick, and we want the call status to equal active. So if we now have this, we basically are seeing no one. But if we go back into the grid view and we take one of these as an example, and we change the call status to active, then what will happen is we will get something popping up inside of past calls right here. And I've actually just realized something. So this start time here is pulling through as 2001 because we're not actually adding a start time inside in years inside of our set start time inside of the hiring funnel, inside of the Calendly automation. So you see this here, CCCCD, 4 M's, and then HHMM. So HHMM is hours and minutes. That's pretty clear. This M is month written in its full words, and you can see that truncates if you remove M's. It turns into the number when you add one of them, and it turns into the single digit when you add them. So we want 4 of these, but we actually want YYYY in lowercase so that we can pull through the year. Because right now, if we pull through the year, what we'll be able to do, and I would need to, do all of the other previous steps for this to pull through anyways. But what we want to do is have 2025 pop up, because if that doesn't pop up there, then basically every single call will be marked as passed. So I'm going to manually change this because I've now just changed this inside of the automation, but we basically need to take this back over to 2025. And you can see now that when I move this to from 2001 to 2025, this tick disappears because it's no longer in the past. Today is the 12th. And this is for the 13th. So let's just move this date back to the 11th, just as an example, so that we can get this tick back and we can add a record into the past calls view. So this is now working the way that it should be, because if, for example, this candidate went from invited to interview to DQ, he would leave the view. So if we go back into the interviews and we move them back over from DQ and we put them over to invited for interview, then they will return back to normal. If this start time is in the past, in the future, as opposed to the past, then this won't activate. And if this person is cancelled, then they also will not show up inside of past calls. So that is how you manage this. And this flow is what's going to be used to trigger another automation, which is going to be this call past automation, which I'll make from scratch. So, let me refresh the page. Sometimes Airtable does this, but the whole point of this is when a record enters that view, we basically want to take the ID of the attached applicant and basically just change their job pipeline status. So what we're going to do here is we're going to rename this as past calls move applicant / candidate. I've been using the word candidate the entire time. I'm just going to continue using the word candidate. So when a record enters a view, we're going to take the interviews table and we're going to take the view called past calls, and we're going to choose a record, and the record that we just put in there should pop up. Now, this is the same type of flow that you get inside of N8N, where you have an input and then you have an output. It's the exact same principle where you have the results after running the execute step inside of N8N, where it shows in this format. It will show in this format inside of Airtable. So if you open up field values, you'll see name is this, candidate is an array, so you can click into it and it will give you number 1, and this is the ID of the candidate. Same thing with the job role, linked record, and then some values by linked record, a few other things that they've given you there. This is the ID of the single select, which is called admin assistant. And then you have the job pipeline status and a bunch of other things as well. So all of this information is what's going to be dragged into the next step. This is basically how all automation platforms that are worth their weight in gold operate. You have an input, you test it, you have an output, and the output gets spelled out to you in this indented form in JSON. It's all the same. So next thing we want to do is we want to update a record. And we want to update a record inside of the candidates table. And the record ID that we want to update is the record ID from this past calls candidate. So we click on this plus here, and then we click on this link here. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull up a few options. It's going to ask us if we want to insert the whole base record URL, the record URL for the page, which we don't really want to use because this has got to do with an interface page. And then we have values from the Airtable record ID for the actual interview, the person who took the action, name, candidate, job role, job status, yada, yada, yada. So we don't actually want a lot of these. The only thing that we want is the connected candidates. So we just need to click on candidate here, and we want to display the ID because we're looking for the ID to change. Then we want on the fields, we want to change the status, and the status needs to be changed to interview taken. And then if we generate a preview, it looks like we have interview taken as the change that would need to be made. And it will do so if instead of generating a preview, we run as configured. And from here, we click run test. And what that will do, if we ignore this resume field because we're not rendering any attachments there, we are changing the status from interview before to interview after. So now it's on interview taken. And this in and of itself is the only automation that is needed in order to move things along as and when things have happened. So if you're hiring somebody to basically take over the hiring process for you and you want to monitor how things are going, you can now see from the interface when somebody has applied, because you'll get the notification coming through inside of Slack. Once they have taken the tests inside the test gorilla, you can move them over here and you can add their values in here manually. Or if you're using their platform, you can use their API to actually move things over as well, based on the email that they've signed up to the test for. From there, you can move them manually over and say, okay, I've looked at people in number 10, I've looked at people in number 20. Let's take these people from number 10 and these people from number 20 and dump them into invite for interview. If you have your own boilerplate interview text and email to send, what you can do is update it such that whenever somebody moves into this status, you could just send them an email based on the email inside of the candidate view. I don't like doing that because since we're moving things manually all the time, there's going to be an issue where you may move someone from back here to back over here and then do the same thing again and then send an email twice. That's the reason why I didn't actually include that in this video. But once this interview the interview request has been sent and they book a call, you will see them pop up inside of the interviews table. And then once they've popped up inside the interviews table and the interview has been taken because they didn't get marked as DQ for doing anything stupid between the time that they booked the interview and the time that they took the call wasn't cancelled because they didn't cancel it on anyone's behalf or whatever it may be. And the call was in the past, i.e. the call's been taken, then it will move over here and you can determine if you want to give them a trial task, and then again, it'll be the same thing where you would send them a manual message saying, hey, book in a call here, and then we can get the trial task done. And then offer sent would occur when you decide to send them an offer, which could be either over email or over PandaDoc or whatever platform that you're using for contracts and e-signatures. If they're talking back and forth, you can move them here into negotiating. And then when they are hired, which could be whenever the contract has been completed, you would add them, they would be added here, and then the onboarding process would occur for said role. So I've covered I've basically covered everything up until DQ on the interview on this one. The final thing would be to talk about how to generate a dashboard that looks a little bit like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to basically make a dashboard from scratch based on the information that we have inside of the data tabs in the candidates and in interviews, because all of the information that we're pulling from will pull from the candidates in this case, and will pull from the interviews when you decide to bring that information through. But right now, what's currently showing is candidates, because this is the candidate overview, and the source for everything in this group is candidates. And if we wanted to add a new group, then we would have to add over here a table for candidates, interviews, contracts, or agent templates, and then that will be its own section that we would then filter against. But let's start off by basically creating another interface. So we'll call this one the dashboard, and we'll put a little alchemy pot there. And then we want to click on dashboard over here, and then we want to click next, and then we want to take from candidates and click finish. Now, already it's giving you some stuff that you can use. But the thing that you need to realize is that when it comes to making dashboards, a great dashboard tells a story, and a great dashboard uses visual hierarchy very, very well. So with the visual hierarchy that we have here, we always start off with the numbers. And the way that people are going to read, and this is the way that people read in the UK, obviously it's different in Japan and where people read from right to left. Everybody reads from left to right. So we want the most important information. And the thing is, people read in what I like to call an L shape. So they'll start top left and then go top right, and then they'll go down, and then they'll go to the right, down to the right, down to the right. So the way to actually make this work in an attempt to make this something that is usable and actually looks pretty is to take the most important items that you need and put them in the top left. So I actually think that this is a little bit more important, because the total active applicants is the people who have applied for jobs and are not currently disqualified. And that will tell you how many people are actually actively looking at things. And if you wanted to, because it's more important to understand who's further down the line, you can move this over here. But basically it starts off with total interviewing applicants, total active applicants, total number of applicants in numbers. And then we have more numbers here. And then we have some pivot tables. So the reason why I've put the numbers here is because the numbers are clearer than putting it on a graph. I don't particularly like the graphs that Airtable creates. They can be great if you're using grouping, which we can get into in another video. But the only thing that I'm going to do here is just make these buttons and then create a pivot table for high scoring applicants. So that's what we're going to get into on the dashboard that has not been published. So the first step here is to create the number blocks. So the first number block that we're going to make is total interviewing candidates. And these are the total number of candidates that are currently in the interview stage and beyond. And the way that this works is that there are two ways to create numbers from the data that you have inside of Airtable. The first way is through straight filtering, and this is what we're going to use anyways, where the status is none of the DQ stages or the initial stages. So invited, applied, taken test, gorilla, and everything from those three. So these are all of the candidates that are at least interviewing. And the other way that you can make numbers is through summaries, and the summaries will take a field of your choosing, and you can either see how many are filled, how many are unique, the percent of the field that you've picked that are empty, the percent that are filled, and the percent that are unique as well. And it depends on the type of view what will come up here. So here, this is a name view, which is a string. So these are the ones that you can see. But for a number field, it will come out as something different. So if I take test gorilla overall, and the summary type is, and I open up the summary types, you can see that they are all different types, and these are all number types here. So you had the filled, unique, percent empty, filled, and percent unique as well. But now you have sum, average, median, min, max, range, standard deviation. So numbers and strings are always going to be the two that you're going to make most of your numbers by. But in this case, we just need a count of all the people that match this filter. So this is total interviewing candidates. So this one here is basically a way to open up the record detail. So if I click allow here, then it will show us, oh, okay, so these are the interviewing candidates that we have. It basically brings out a tiny little table for us, which we can add a couple of different things to. So we could add the job role here. We could also add the applicant rating here, and this is a manual rating. And if you click again, then you can open up another record detail, and this will be the candidate record detail. So I already created this, and I did this in my own time when I made the actual base. But the whole point of this is you have your groups the same way that we're building the dashboard right now. You have your groups and you want to give it a title, and then you just want to drag your fields in and then mark if they're editable or not. And this is the order of which I created that. So this is a very, very simple way of looking at things. And for every single person that you are working with, you're going to need to organize the information that you have on your data table in a way that can be used for the people that are actually going to be sat inside of this system doing the work for you. So we've just opened up that. So now we can basically, now people can click on here to expand and open this up. If this isn't going to be, information that you want to share out in public, I'd probably turn this off and just have it so that you just, okay, these are the candidates, this is so on and so forth, this is so on and so forth. You can't see the details within them, because if you can see the details within them, then you may be able to see certain data that we don't need to see, like personal information, or if for whatever reason you're holding like API keys inside of your data, you don't want people to be able to see that by clicking a couple of times into your dashboard. So that's the total interviewing candidates table badge. Now we want to duplicate this, and we want to say total candidates, total non-DQ'd candidates. So we'll just call it total candidates, and we'll say this is the total number of candidates that are not disqualified. And this is just a filter where the status is none of the disqualified stages. And we can actually say none of the hired people either, because that will give us a list of people that are, in fact, we'll keep these alone, because if we include this, then we're being a bit more solid about the numbers we have. All right, so that's the total interviewing candidates, and then these are the total candidates that are not disqualified. And then we just continue the duplication process, because we now have these two numbers here. The third number that we're going to create is going to be a total candidates view in another format, and that is total candidates full stop. So we're going to actually delete the filter and take this here and say this is the total candidates, and this is the total number of candidates that have applied for roles. And this one here, not DQ'd, we'll just call it active, because it's a bit easier to say active than it is for these. So this is the top row. Now I don't like how this is shifted, so I'm going to write a bit less wording here. So this is total number of interviewing candidates, and we're going to remove this and then say and beyond. So the way that it reads now is total number of interviewing candidates and beyond. This one here is total number of candidates that are not disqualified, and this one here is total number of candidates that have applied for roles. Now I might still make that, I'll still change this to make it look even prettier, but for now I just want a new row, and this new row is also going to start with a number. And now we're going to pull from the Test Gorilla stuff. So we're going to say Test Gorilla average, overall average, and this is going to be average score of average overall score on Test Gorilla. Now the Test Gorilla field is going to we're going to need to basically summarize all of the field values for Test Gorilla overall, and the summary type is going to be the average. So we'll take average here. And what we also want to do is we want to filter by people who've actually filled it out. So we need to filter where Test Gorilla is greater than 0. So this will enable us to look at this Test Gorilla average and take everybody that has actually filled this in and average out all of their scores. And we'll make this one blue, light blue. And then we just want to duplicate that for all of the other Test Gorilla values. So if we click duplicate, and then we, instead of choosing Test Gorilla overall, we choose problem solving. And then we say, this is the problem solving average, problem solving scores. And this is average problem solving score. And then repeat the others for the next two. And here you can see that we have Test Gorilla overall, problem solving scores, time management scores, and communication scores. So let's get rid of the graph for now, because we don't actually need the graph to ascertain what we need to ascertain. And we can look at either having a pivot table, which is a breakdown of the people that we're looking at from a numerical value, or we can look at a list. Now, the pivot table itself actually isn't horrible. I do want to have the list there. So what we're going to do is we're going to click the plus in between the Test Gorilla scores and the pivot table so that we can squeeze something in the middle of it. And what we're going to squeeze in the middle of it is a list. And this list, we'll just drag up here, is the same kind of list that you would get just here. So we're just opening up a space for us to see on the dashboard what is going on with every single person. But the view that we want to have is the high scoring applicants view. And this is for people who are in the middle of the interviewing process, who are above the median for the first few people that you've seen, but quite a bit above that. So maybe the average Test Gorilla scores have been 45, 50. For that reason, we want to see people who are 60 and above. Okay, well, let's create a filter to find the people where the Test Gorilla overall score is more than or equal to 60. And let's also do the same thing for the score that was generated by the scoring agent as well. So if that score is greater than or equal to 50, then we will also see them in here. Now, we can't just have a naked list like this with no title. So we'll call this high scoring applicants. And in doing so, we are now able to show exactly what is going on here. Now, for the high scoring applicants, we can now see that there is a way for us to open them up, and we can then use the same record detail that we've been using on the other interfaces, and we can see what the applicant notes are. We can see the general details. We can see the score and the reasoning. We can see all of the recommended actions if you decided to generate them through the field that we have here. And we have the Test Gorilla scores and a bunch of other things. So the key behind this dashboard is when the data is created in a way that makes it easy to generate findings from it, you can basically take that data, ask yourself some questions about what you want to see, and then use the dashboard to generate those findings. And if you remember the idea of L-shaped reading, then you'll remember that the top left is the most important value, and the bottom right is the least important value. And it goes in order from, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in that kind of order. So now I know that these are the number of interviewing candidates that we have. These are the number of active candidates. These are the number of candidates in general. And these are all the average Test Gorilla scores, which is a little bit less important. And then we have the high scoring applicants, which is just a little bit less important than that. So, and here is just a pivot table, which we can add a description for, which is number of people in different stages of the interview process. And now the final thing that we want is a gigantic filter for everything on here. So we're going to click on the entire group, and we're going to click on the drop downs. And what we're going to do here is change the drop downs that we want, or we can we can change the field of the drop down to job role and whatever else we have inside of the candidates field. So we can basically look for who has, great familiarity with Upwork and chatbots and video editing. We can basically say, okay, for all the people that have, basically have a little experience with video editing, and the job role is for admin assistant, we can now see who the high scoring applicants are for these people based on these filters. And we can do the same thing for developer. We can do the same thing for business analyst, operations manager, and every other job role that you decide to add as well. So you can see how this entire system lives and breathes and generates visibility across the entire system based on what needs to be seen and the information that you want to garner. And that alone is the system in a complete nutshell. So in closing, first thing, build the data out. Build out your tables for candidates, for interviews, for contracts, and for agent templates. And do so with these fields that you have here, from the email, the status, the job role, the resume, the notes that you're taking on the person, the Test Gorilla scores, the maximum and minimum number of hours, their experience, any questions that you want to ask them, which in this case, if you're going to use these two fields over and over again for every single one of your clients, for your applicants, then I would rename it from, Upwork process and prompt engineering to question 1 and question 2, or job question 1, job question 2, because then that will be dynamic and can be used across every single one of your applicant questions. And then you can just check inside of the form to determine which one is the one that you're looking for, or which one those questions are. Then preferred working hours and all the other things that you need to add there, including the linked records to interviews and to the contracts and the agent template, sorry. Then interviews, you need to include the link to the candidate and lookup fields for their email, the pipeline status and the role, the start time, the end time formula, which is the start time plus 30 minutes, as you can see here, and the past formula, which is if the difference between the end time and now is greater than 0, then it means it's false. If not, it's true, which means that it will tick whenever the call is in the past, and it will be unticked whenever the call is still upcoming. And then you have call status, which is active or cancelled here, and that will create the things that you need in order to generate the view, which is going to be where the job pipeline is none of the DQ fields, the call is in the past, and the call status is active. Then you have the agent templates here. So you want to add the system prompt, the ID, which you've taken from the form, which will come into place when we go in to talk about the interface and the forms. You want the ID, you want the name, and in this case, we didn't talk about the contract template, and I'll get onto that in a second. You want to add these 4 fields to this agent templates table. And then from there, you build the interfaces, and the interfaces include the job role, a view for all of the candidates, which is just a dump of everything on the candidates page. And inside of here, you want to make sure that this is in the board view, and it's in a way where you can edit the entire view by editing records in line. From here, you build your interface pages, you build the record detail, which includes the fields for the notes, general details, the score, and then the other AI fields, as well as the test gorilla stuff and anything else that is included inside of the form. That then breeds the ability to create the forms. And in this case, the form that we're looking for is this one here, which is going to be just all of the fields from the candidates table edited by name so that they turn into questions for someone externally to answer. And then you want to make sure that the following URL is on the page form fill itself. It is webhook URL /webhook/hiring-agent (record ID equals record_ID in the curly brackets ampersand role equals the role that you are looking for, which is the same as the ID on the agent templates page. Make sure as well when you're turning this on for yourself that you can see how we've removed the test part of this webhook, because when we're turning everything on in here, we don't want to use the test URL, we want to use the production URL. And the difference between the test and the production is that one has test and one doesn't have test. So when you're turning everything on, make sure all of your webhooks remove the -test from the middle of it so that they can work without you actually needing to do any manual pressing and waiting for people to fill in the form, because that's just not how things are going to happen. So that's the form fill. Then the automation. You want to make sure that the automation does everything that it needs to do, and it sends details over to the execute workflow step after reading the resume and doing everything else that it needs to do in that step. And then, and I'll just stop this here because this was on the test version, you want to make sure that everything's connected as well, which is very, very important, especially this part here. So this part initially wasn't connected, and the execute workflow step wasn't connected because we didn't actually have the job scoring agent here. But now that we do, and this is all fully built out, we can now connect it, and then we can drag in the fields from the edit fields column here, job application, user prompt, system prompt. I would also add a record ID, candidate record ID as well, because from here, you can just take the record ID, and instead of taking a search record step in the middle of the job scoring agent, you would just take a get request and it will 100% be accurate, because people may change their emails midway through doing the things that they need to do. And then when creating the job scoring agent, you want to make sure that we have the agent that is pulling through the system prompt from your Airtable and the user prompt from the previous step. We set up everything in this manner, and then we're sending the Slack messages, and then we're marking people as DQ'd or qualified based on the rules that you've set inside of your automation. And then hiring calls. Whenever we get to a position where someone has applied and or has taken the test gorilla tests, and we know that we want to interview them, we send a message out manually saying, "Hey, I'd like to put you through for an interview." Once that's done, and they start booking the calls, this will trigger, and this will manage the entirety of the interviews page here. And every single interview that comes through will be added here. And then once they get added, what we'll have is a pipeline status, a job role, a start time and end time, when it passes, when the call is marked as passed. And then from there, the automation that is triggered with the view will search for whenever a record enters a view, the status will be updated, and we'll always see inside the interface who has had an interview taken and who hasn't. And then with all of that information, we can then accumulate every single detail into a dashboard that makes things easy for us to look at. And if I publish this last dashboard, you can see how it looks as well. So this is the entirety of the system, and I'm going to go into a couple of changes that I would make in the future. So we've shown how the architecture that goes into building the systems works. So we showed you the base. We showed you the formulas, the single selects, the multi-selects, the text fields, the long text fields, the AI text fields, and the date fields that go into building the data management system that powers the interface that gets created, that everybody lives in when they do the work, and the automations and agents that sit on top of those that then all come together to power the dashboard by taking the strings and the numbers that are generated across the process and displaying them in a way that answers the questions that we have, or the questions that you have that you want to get answered over time to improve the visibility of what you have. We've also covered everything, as I've mentioned, in the summary that I've just given. Here's what was missing from the build. So there is an automation that you can create where you can use your Fathom or your AI note taker. And once those summaries are created, you could use that as a trigger to generate changes inside of the candidate records. So in this situation, what we have is a trigger, a webhook trigger, which I want to see how far, I won't be able to zoom in, but you can see here, there's a webhook trigger, which is coming from Zapier, in fact, because the one thing about these AI note-taking apps is that a lot of them have terrible integrations, and some of them with better integrations actually have worse summaries. The sweet middle ground that I've found is with Fathom, because Fathom is really good at actually joining meetings. Some of these note takers don't actually join meetings very well. Firefly sometimes just leaves the meeting entirely if the meeting goes over 45 minutes or 30 minutes or however long it's allotted for. And it has a direct Zapier integration, and the summary is fantastic. So what I do is I have an automation, and this is actually something that's active, but it's actually incomplete. You can see the gray and the purple here. Those are meant to be where this switch is meant to go up. So I haven't actually completed all of this just yet, but this is the reason why I'm saying that this is what is missing, and it's something that I would add if I was making this myself as well. Every single time that there's a Fathom recording, I use a code step inside of Zapier, generated by Claude, of course, because I'm not coding this, to send all of that input data over to N8N, and then this webhook picks it up. And then what happens is, I'm going to see if I can actually zoom all the way in. What happens is, we basically, and you won't be able to read all of the writing, we retrieve all of the emails and we turn it into an array, and then we split that out. We then loop over all of the arrays, and if it belongs to a client, if any of those emails belongs to a client, it will go down here. If none of them belong to a client, and we're removing internal emails here, so any of our icarusgrowth.com emails don't get added in, get filtered out of this code block. If they don't come through here, it will go through here. And then what we'll do is we'll send a message saying, hey, this wasn't a client meeting, we're still going. And then we're using an LLM chain to basically determine what type of meeting it was. And from there, we have a bunch of meeting types, from scoping sessions, which are our onboarding calls, to miscellaneous calls, sales calls, impromptu calls, team meetings, and interviews. And once the interviews part comes through, we then know that all we need to do is take the emails that are left and see if they belong to somebody inside of our candidates table. And if they do, we can then attach the summary of that meeting or we can even evaluate the meeting with another agent and say, hey, was this meeting good? Was this meeting bad? So on and so forth. Let's pick out certain things that I may not have taken from my notes and see if we can use that to improve or augment the information that we have about the applicant already. So that is one automation that includes a ton of agents, which is very, very large, that I would have liked to have put into this as well, but is beyond the scope of this call, mostly because I haven't made it yet. So call summaries generated by AI where the candidates are combed through. That right there is that is a type of automation that would be very, very handy to have for a hiring system. Number 2, offer generation form. So this is basically a form that will send the job application contract with the client's details. So N8N doesn't support PandaDoc as a native integration, and you need to be on the enterprise plan of PandaDoc to get access to the developer platform. So I didn't make this. So my options would be either to use Make or to use esignatures.io, because they just have very, very simple HTTP requests. The only reason why I wouldn't have gone for esignatures is because I use PandaDoc. So I'm not going to add another tool to my tech stack when I don't need to. And it's also not as... the contracts don't come out looking as good as they do with PandaDoc. You can make really, really nice proposals and contracts on PandaDoc. And if you want to set a really professional precedence to the way things go inside of your business, you would want to have something that actually looks quite good. And this is number 3, not number 4. Contract tracking / completion flow. So the way that this works is whenever the contract is filled in, and you can see here, this is the PandaDoc trigger. Whenever a contract is signed, or whenever a contract is viewed, because you can actually track multiple different stages. If someone opens up the PandaDoc document for the first time, you can get a webhook payload, which is called document viewed. You can do the same thing for document voided, document completed, document so on and so forth. When documents are completed, we want to have that trigger send the new hire a series of onboarding information via automation whenever they complete a contract. So for example, new team member onboarding forms, an email to book your first call with a team / line manager that then internally updates the Airtable as they view and complete the doc, creates new training material from scratch by duplicating templates in Google Drive, and adds records to the internal team table in the operations base. And since I use PandaDoc, like I said, I would use make.com for these automations, since there's a powerful integration with it, and it happens infrequently enough that I don't need 5,000 executions of a whole system. I don't need N8N's advantages in that sense. I can get away with, the 10,000 or the 20,000 plan on Make. And just to kind of, as like a small tangent, I have Zapier, Make, and N8N, and I highly recommend that you're agnostic by what you use. The only reason why, and the only thing that you need to do is just make sure that you use the ones that you need for the requisite benefits that they provide. Zapier is expensive, super expensive, but they have a free plan where you can use code, and those code blocks can send webhooks to Make and to N8N. So if you want to do anything that requires more than one step and you want the free plan on Zapier, you can just have the trigger be the integration that doesn't exist on Make or N8N and send the information over to Make and N8N so that you can do those things. Make is the nice middle ground between N8N and Zapier, where there's a fair few integrations, but it's not got the agents. If I need an agent, I'll go N8N straight up. And N8N's benefit is the fact that it has the ability to use, it comes with 5,000 executions of an entire automation, as opposed to executions of each individual node. Because for example, in this automation, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 operations. But in N8N, this entire flow is one operation. So if I have very, very high volume tasks that need to be done, I'll have them be made inside of N8N. That's another benefit. If I have mail hooks as well, I'll get them done inside of make.com. But you can see how I'm using all 3 of them, and you can see how all 3 of them play a role in the systems that we would set up. So that is the end of this video. And hopefully you got exactly what you needed to get out of it. This is exactly how to create an entire system from scratch. And this is one system out of one department. We haven't included, again, we didn't include onboarding. We didn't include the team training element of this. We didn't include anything in regards to creating other systems inside of other departments either, like other operation systems, because I've already covered things like onboarding and things on other calls and other videos. And I've also gone through a lot of the stuff on sales and marketing as well, which you can find on my YouTube channel, which is where I'm going to direct you right now. So this is the end of the video. Thank you very much if you've gotten this far. I'll talk to you soon.